Chapter 9 of Impatiens, and you'll see I let my hair down for this one, which I haven't washed since Friday, and it's Sunday. Just cause. God, it's a really pretty day here. Chapter 9. If my mother had paid more attention to my sister Deirdre, she probably would have been as frustrated as the rest of us are with her. Out of all of us, Deirdre is the prettiest, and we're a nice-looking bunch. Clearly. Smartest, and we're an intelligent family, and she can sing better than any of us and everyone else on the planet. In spite of these gifts, she never made any attempt at any point in her life to pursue any goal that made any use of them. It would seem natural that as family members, my siblings and I would give Deirdre a hard time about her unwillingness to model, or study astrophysics, or sing at the Met, but we didn't. There's something about her, some kind of cool calm that didn't welcome criticism of her choices. No one ever gave her any. Deirdre has the pale, beautiful skin of a porcelain doll. During the 70s and early 80s, before skin cancer became such an issue, she would join her friends at the beach but lather her face and body in sunblock in order to maintain its milky tone. She never wears makeup of any kind. She doesn't have to. Her lips are blood red and her dark brown eyes are naturally striking. Her black hair can sometimes be found in a ponytail, but more often is held in a bun. Deirdre is 60 inches tall and has a slim figure and small, delicate bust. The only exercise she does, and has been doing since before the 80s exercise craze, is walking long distances. She walks and walks and walks, taking everything in or just being at peace with herself. She can most often be seen wearing black or dark brown trousers and dark sweaters in soft wools. She never smokes, although a cigarette would look perfectly natural between her index and middle fingers. She drinks a lot of water and eats a lot of bread. In addition to being beautiful, Deirdre is smart. As a girl, while all her classmates were finger painting, Deirdre would find the teacher's newspaper and take it to a quiet corner to read. No one ever discouraged my 6-year-old sister's interest in current events. No one ever discouraged anything she did. It was as if the people who knew her knew she had her own agenda, and they respected it. From the time she was a child, Deirdre spent every Sunday morning watching Meet the Press and Face the Nation, and other news programs with our father. They had a regular date in the den and would discuss what they saw and learned during commercial breaks and while sitting on the front porch in the afternoons. As an adolescent, William Jr. joined them. In English, math, and social studies, Deirdre was a genius and earned A's every semester. In science, she didn't do as well, not because she didn't understand it, but because she didn't have the interest. Deirdre's worst subject was French. From what I gather from Sean, our sister's attitude toward foreign languages was that there are enough interesting things to read and listen to in English, and when she read them all, she would then study French or Spanish. Deirdre has always had strong opinions, although she has a delicate way of expressing them. She has her own way of looking at things, and when the rest of us find her attitudes odd or surprising, a simple explanation makes them reasonable. When a teenage Joan was preparing Deirdre for her first ballroom dancing lesson at the Lillian Langford School, she gave her a pair of white gloves my mother had bought years before. All young ladies had to wear white gloves to ballroom dance class. Deirdre took them from her but never put them on. When she arrived at the St. John's Auditorium and went through the receiving line at the beginning of the session, Miss Langford asked her why her hands were bare. My 11-year-old sister explained, respectfully, that she saw no point in holding someone's hand if it was through a layer of fabric. A confused, thoughtful, and mildly scared Lillian Langford had no response and didn't bring the subject up again. Deirdre would attend gym when she wanted to. When she didn't, which was most of the time, she would be found in the library. While her poor attendance should have resulted in a failing grade, it didn't. Her teachers would never have thought of failing her. It would have interfered with Deirdre's program, which they knew involved additional studying. In other words, they knew she wasn't smoking dope or in the school parking lot. Itchy nose. My sister had to present an oral report in her junior high school social studies class. The book she chose as her subject was Mein Kampf. This impressed her teacher, a hot slab of 70s beefcake named Mr. O'Day. But it upset her classmates, who assumed she was a minority-hating Nazi. I understand from Joan that the ensuing debate between Deirdre and the rest of the class made junior high history when her report turned into an impromptu dissertation on the fear of knowledge we're all taught and how ignorance makes us weak. I learned also that some of the children's parents were so disturbed by what they heard of my sister's report they called the school to complain. The whole thing scandalized the district, and Deirdre was called to the principal's office to explain why she chose to read and discuss Hitler's book. Mr. O'Day joined her at the meeting to defend her, explaining that reading the book didn't mean agreeing with it. My sister appreciated her teacher's effort, but at 12 was more than capable of handling the administrator's interrogation. She said gently, "I read Mein Kampf because I wanted to see what all the fuss was about." The principal said, "Oh, okay," and dismissed her and Mr. O'Day. In spite of all of this, I never classified my sister as a rebel. She had nothing to prove, and she had no hostility toward my parents or other authority figures. She did what made sense to her, and that sometimes including breaking social norms and even gender roles. My father made it very clear to all of us growing up that cutting the grass was a job that only his sons were to do. I'm sure the image of a woman pushing a lawnmower was uncomfortable to him, although my mother did it on occasion. One Saturday when she was a teenager and had been put on babysitting duty, my sister noticed the grass was very long. There were plenty of Gallagher boys around to cut it, but she wasn't that busy and decided to do it herself. She did a terrific job. And when my parents returned from wherever they were, they commented on how good it looked. Deirdre said, "Thank you." My stunned father looked at her angrily, hesitated, and then said, "Good job." My sister also delivered the Roanoke Register several times when William Jr. or Colin was sick or on a Boy Scout trip or something. Had Deirdre a love for Catholicism, she would probably have become St. Sebastian's first altar girl. She didn't, although it would have been fascinating to hear what Father Reynolds had to say when she showed up for training. She would have handled him in the same matter-of-fact way she handled everyone else who said no to her. Deirdre didn't belong to any clubs, perform in any plays, or participate in any extracurricular anything. She was not encouraged to by her teachers or peers. As far as they were concerned, any attempts to persuade her to join the Glee Club would have been impertinent. It must have seemed a shame, especially to the chorus director, who, while not ever having heard my sister's singing voice, understood from her friends that it was amazing. My sister never studied singing. It wasn't on her list of things to do. As it turns out, though, she didn't have to. Her voice is perfectly lovely. Deirdre sings on holidays and only when asked by one of our parents. And when she sings, Thomas always accompanies her. My mother always asked Deirdre to sing something religious, usually all that I am, which goes, all that I am, all that I do, all that I'll ever know, I can be, something like that. A dreadful dirge, Deirdre can only barely make sound sweet. Once my mother asked her to sing Ave Maria. My sister politely refused, explaining that her voice wasn't worthy of such a song. My mother was so impressed with her humility, she glowed with pride. I think Deirdre was just giving Mother an excuse. She never attended Mass with any regularity, and naturally no one questioned her frequent absences. She saw Catholicism and other religions as interesting socially and politically, and when she read the Bible, it was for its history and literature. She never explained this to our mother, who, when seeing her studying one of the Gospels, was reassured that her efforts to raise devout Catholics were successful. My father always asked Deirdre to sing Second-Hand Rose. This she was happy to do for him because it gave him so much pleasure. On occasion, she would further delight him by adding little dance steps or gestures to her performances. She would ultimately encourage Dad to join her for the last chorus, which he would always do and which we all got a kick out of watching. Unfortunately, Rose would often intrude on one of these little concerts and insist on boring and embarrassing us with her mediocre voice. Deirdre was always gracious about giving up the floor to her, and my parents would listen to her politely, but as soon as she got started plodding through The Man That Got Away or some other torch song, the rest of us found other things to do. If we stayed to listen, it was because Thomas would use the opportunity to improvise and generally wail on the keys. We all enjoyed this, and poor Rose convinced herself that our big smiles and hearty applause were due to her show-stopping voice. In spite of Deirdre's disinterest in school activities, she had several friends whose plays and sporting events she would watch. At these events, she would make every effort to pay attention, clap and cheer at the proper times, but more often than not would pick up a stray newspaper or magazine and begin reading. This never bothered her friends, who were always happy she was there. Indeed, Deirdre's best friend, Sheila Hagney, told me once that my sister was the only person, the other Hagneys included, on whom she could count to attend every function in which she was involved. Far from being offended that her friend always wound up reading the paper in the bleachers, Sheila told everyone she found Deirdre's wandering attention endearing. Sheila Hagney was a vivacious young lady. I often wondered how she and my sister could be so close when they appeared to be so different. Sheila was on the student senate. She was in chorus and in the course of the school musicals, wrote a social column for the school newspaper, and twirled the baton in the marching band. Like Deirdre, she is extremely pretty. She has big teeth and had a feathered Farrah Fawcett Major's hairdo. Deirdre spent many an afternoon with her reading Richard Nixon's In the Arena or something while Sheila practiced her baton. They usually hung out at our house because Sheila had crushes on William Jr., Colin, and Sean. Sometimes she would turn on the radio in the kitchen and ask one of them to dance with her. William Jr. would politely refuse, but Colin and Sean always said yes. My sharpest memories of these afternoons feature Sheila and Colin dancing to early disco. Sheila enjoyed playing USO Hostess and taught us all how to boogie. One weekend afternoon, she managed to persuade William Jr. to join Colin, Sean, Thomas, Matthew, and me in The Hustle. My father was home and enjoyed watching us. Sheila encouraged him to join, but Dad said no, although he appeared to want to. Sensing this, Deirdre slipped into the den and put a 45 of The Alley Cat on the stereo, and we all, my father included, wound up doing that. The day after our little dance party, I learned that Sheila had bet my sister she would one day get William Jr. to dance with the rest of us, something Deirdre was certain couldn't be done. She lost, and rather than paying her friend cash, buying her a meal, or writing an English paper for her, Deirdre Gallagher, the most beautiful woman I will ever see, had to have her hair cut at the barber shop in New York City's Port Authority bus terminal. I gotta scratch my nose while you absorb that. Of course, rather than pitch a fit about it, my sister amicably accepted her fate, and she and Sheila took the train into the city the following Saturday morning. Sean begged Sheila to let him go with them to the barber shop, but she refused as a courtesy to her friend. This, of course, didn't stop her from giving us all a detailed description of the event when they returned that evening. Sheila said that after arriving at Grand Central Station, she and Deirdre walked to the bus station. She described my sister as being very chatty and in a marvelous mood, as if she were going to Times Square to see a play and not get her hair massacred. What a sport. They entered the bus terminal and had to ask someone where the shop was. As Sheila told us this, I imagined the two pretty teenage girls asking a bus driver or homeless person for directions to the barber shop and yelped with amused excitement. They finally found the shop Sheila described as small and dingy and occupied by 3 old men. 2 senile, cigar-smoking corpses playing checkers in a corner, and 1 hairless barber who wore Coke bottle glasses and who appeared to have hands as steady as Helena's. "You girls lost?" the barber said in a shaky voice. "No," my sister said. "I'm here to get a haircut." The 2 corpses looked up from their game, exchanged glances with each other and the barber, and watched Deirdre approach a rusty old chair and make herself comfortable in it. "I need 2 inches off the back," she said to the blind old man. Sheila, awed by her courage, pulled a chair up to the equally impressed checker players and watched as the barber found his way to the counter below the mirror my sister was sat facing. He fumbled for a comb and a pair of scissors and raised the objects to Deirdre's head. As he ran the comb through her hair, Sheila sprang to her feet and shouted, "You don't have to do this!" Deirdre replied calmly, "Nonsense, my hair is entirely too long." And she smiled, a go-ahead to the barber. He looked at Sheila and said, "Relax, honey, when I'm done, your friend here's going to look like Audrey Hepburn." The barber, who later introduced himself as Frank, wound up doing a terrific job on my sister, who, not to take anything away from the old guy, would have looked good with a crew cut. Sheila, once assured that my sister wasn't going to get her throat cut, introduced herself to the corpses whose names were Al and Sal, and I'm not kidding. They invited her to join them for checkers, which she was glad to do, and the girls enjoyed a lovely afternoon at the Port Authority bus terminal's barbershop, chatting, playing checkers, and ordering a pizza. Deirdre went back and she brought the rest of us with her. One afternoon during junior year of high school, Sheila was practicing her baton on our driveway while Deirdre sat on the back porch reading. My sister found her friend's talent fascinating and actually put down her copy of The Making of the President and asked her to show her how to do it. Naturally, she picked it up quickly and soon had it spinning through her fingers as well as any majorette. So impressed was Sheila that she suggested Deirdre join the high school marching band. My sister refused, but continued playing with the baton, throwing it up and catching it, throwing it up, spinning and catching it, practicing more and more until she could do it blindfolded. As far as I know, this was the only physical activity besides walking Deirdre ever did. My father found his daughter's skill so grand, he and my mother bought her a baton the following Christmas. We all found it oddly amusing that among the books, magazine subscriptions, and dark sweaters that made up Deirdre's gifts that year was a baton, a symbol of everything physical, showy, and shallow. In spite of this, Deirdre was happy to have it and could be found practicing it on the driveway whenever the weather permitted. That spring, the Roanoke High School marching band was scheduled to participate in the town's memorial parade. My parents were attending a function in Rye that day, so Deirdre took Matthew and me to see it. We got there early and set up 3 folding chairs on the sidewalk near Roanoke and Elm Avenues. As we waited for the parade to start, one of Deirdre's classmates, a clarinet player in the band, appeared out of nowhere, huffing and puffing and asking Deirdre to come quickly as one of the tubas fell on Sheila's foot and it was swelling up fast. We followed the boy to the beginning of the parade where a crowd was huddled around a wailing Sheila Hegney. As my sister approached the band, her friend's face lit up. "Thank God you're here. A drum fell on my foot," Sheila said. "I can't go on. I think I broke it." Deirdre looked at the dry-faced majorette and waited. "You're going to have to go on in my place," she continued. Deirdre rolled her eyes and said, "I'm not buying it." "Not buying what?" Sheila asked innocently. "Your ankle," Deirdre said. "A drum didn't fall on your ankle." "It did," Sheila said, and then wailed again. Matthew asked, What is a tuba?" Maybe I should pay attention. Wasn't it a tuba?" The jig was up. Sheila had failed to fool my sister. Deirdre extended a hand to the disappointed and angry baton twirler. She grabbed it and lifted herself up. "I'll get you for this, Deirdre," Sheila said. "You just wait." My sister turned around and walked away. Matthew and I followed her. Behind us, I heard Sheila say to someone, "Sean is going to be so furious with me." Deirdre has never marched in a parade. She has never written a book or run for office or appeared on the cover of Vogue. It's a shame. She would look terrific in a black summer dress, pumps, a string of pearls, and a big round hat with a veil hanging over her face. Instead of doing this, she went to Georgetown in Washington, D.C., where she studied things. I can't say what specifically because she never actually chose a single major. Deirdre studied what interested her at the time, and I'm sure she never took all the basic freshman comp and intro to art history classes that so many colleges require. I know she studied African religions, and she had 2 semesters of Russian history. She took accounting and theater directing and whatever she wanted, regardless of what the prerequisites were. She earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1979 and then chose to stick around and earn a master's in library science. One subject I know she spent quite a bit of time studying was history, for 2 reasons. She enjoyed it, and she met and fell in love with one of her professors, a young man named Tim Flynn. He is tall, fit, and has blue eyes and black hair so dark it's also blue. He is devastatingly handsome. Like Deirdre, he's soft-spoken and chooses not to draw attention to himself. He's likable, interesting, and always on an even keel. I adore him. And I was delighted in the early 80s to learn he and Deirdre had moved in together and planned to marry. Everyone in my family was happy with this news except my parents, and more specifically my mother. This was not just because they were an unmarried couple sharing the same Washington, D.C. apartment, but because Tim Flynn had been married before for like a week or something. Hold on a sec, this fell down. It's chilly. Mother hadn't met Tim before she learned this about him, and after she found out, she had no interest in meeting him at all. Deirdre was forbidden from bringing Tim to our house. Our mother never called Deirdre at the apartment they shared, something my sister probably didn't notice because Mother rarely called her anyway. The few times she did need to speak to her daughter on the phone, she called the inner city library where she worked. Mother was very candid about her objection to my sister's relationship. If they were ever mentioned in her presence, she said simply, "He is divorced, something the Catholic Church does not allow. I do not want Deirdre to marry him, and it pains me that they are living together." When asked his opinion of the relationship, my father always said, even more simply, "I agree with your mother." Deirdre and Tim lived together for 2 years before making specific marriage plans. They finally had a wedding date, July 27th, 1985, which was coincidentally my 19th birthday. They planned to have the ceremony and reception at an Italian restaurant in Washington, D.C., owned by a couple they knew. They planned to invite their... Oh my goodness, relax. They planned to invite their families, including our parents and a few close friends. When Mother learned of these arrangements, she was beside herself. "Why are they getting married in a restaurant?" she said in front of Sean and me one afternoon after opening her invitation. "Why not his parents' house?" Sean said, "Because his parents are dead." My mother looked at him as if to say, "Why didn't I know that?" Sean added, "He is an only child and he has a great aunt in Virginia who is his only living relative." My mother was very disturbed by this. She felt bad for many reasons, and I think I know what they all were. She didn't know anything about the man her daughter, in spite of her very clear objections, was planning to spend her life with. She thought the restaurant thing was sad, but even worse was the thought of Tim Flynn, alone in the world except for a great aunt in Virginia. No parents, no brothers or sisters. As far as my mother was concerned, he had no one. I think hearing this news made Mother feel guilty for refusing to see or acknowledge my sister's fiancé. The following day, my mother visited Father Reynolds to discuss the situation. I learned later from my father that at that point, Mother wanted very much to welcome Tim into our family, but she needed permission to do it. Reynolds apparently gave it to her because as soon as she returned from the rectory, she called Deirdre at her apartment. Tim answered. She said, "Hello, Tim. This is Joan Gallagher. How are you?" I also learned that during their conversation, Father Reynolds, who apparently had an intimate knowledge of my family, mentioned Rose. He said, "Joan, don't risk losing another child." Deirdre and Tim got married by a judge on the front porch of my parents' house. Joan was her maid of honor, and his best man was the owner of the restaurant in D.C. Deirdre wore a simple cream dress with matching shoes, and Tim wore a navy blue pinstripe suit with a starch white collar and red tie. He looked unbelievably handsome. When the two of them arrived in Roanoke the day before the ceremony, Mother met them on the driveway and greeted Tim with tremendous warmth. My father, taking his cue from my mother, shook his hand heartily and told him how glad he was to meet him. My siblings and I stood on the back porch watching this, our lips stretched in wide smiles, our eyes moving between the sweet scene on the driveway and each other's faces, enjoying the entertainment our parents provided with their sudden and complete change of hearts. That summer there was a tremendous drought in the Northeast, and the village of Roanoke had put on a ban on lawn watering. Naturally, my father obeyed the restrictions and, in an effort to prevent the bushes surrounding the house from dying, insisted that all bath water be saved, collected in buckets, taken downstairs, the back ones, and poured over the thirsty bushes that surrounded our front porch for the duration of the drought. To release it into the drain was not tolerated. And if my father were to have caught one of us coming down the stairs in the morning, fresh and clean and with empty hands, he would have read us the riot act. Over the weekend of my sister's wedding, my father asked Matthew and me to bail the bath water for Joan and Deirdre, respectively. We reluctantly agreed out of respect for Dad, but we bitched to each other about the injustice of gender discrimination. As it turns out, we didn't have to do their water because our sisters insisted on taking care of their own. My father caught Deirdre carrying her dirty water down the stairs the morning of her wedding and was furious with me. My sister came to my rescue by explaining how she refused to let anyone carry her water but herself. Dad argued with her, reminding her that it was her wedding day and she should not be working up a sweat after showering and before getting dressed. Their exchange attracted the attention of several of my siblings, including Sean, who found a camera and began taking pictures of Deirdre carrying her awkward load. My sister got into the spirit of things and happily posed for these snapshots by feigning a miserable and fatigued expression. The photos were later developed and are included in her wedding album. My mother also carried her own water that day. So did Tim Flynn. He really didn't have to, as he was a guest. However, he was so concerned about pleasing my parents, he did. Unfortunately, for my future brother-in-law, he filled his buckets too full and then carried them down the front stairs barefoot. Halfway down the unfamiliar staircase, he dropped one and it spilled all over the carpet. Aunt Mary was in the foyer at the time and witnessed the entire thing. She immediately took control of the situation, summoning Sean and Thomas and instructing them to get towels from the second-floor linen closet. The four of them began sopping up the filthy water. Mary and my brothers assuring Tim the little accident was nothing, when they knew that if one of us had done it on the front stairs barefoot, we would have been tied up and thrown into hell. My parents, who were dressing in their bedroom, heard something going on the front stairs and went to investigate. As they approached the scene of the accident, they made eye contact with Mary, who non-verbally sent them back into their room. That's how she did it. After all, while Tim had never met my parents, he learned from Deirdre that they were extremely concerned with maintaining a spotless house, and common sense told him spilling bath water anywhere in it was a major thing. Mom and Dad stayed in their room until the cleaning crew finished, and no one mentioned the incident in Tim's company. Deirdre told us later her husband wanted very much to have the carpet replaced at his own expense. She told him not to worry about it. Deirdre was the third Gallagher to be married and the first to cause any real conflict, as Joan and William Jr.'s weddings were friction-free. I, of course, don't include Rose's little fiasco. I admire my sister for pursuing her relationship with Tim in spite of our parents' feelings. There never was a question but that she would. In doing so, she broke ground for Sean and his shotgun wedding, and Colin, who married out of his, really, our parents' faith. Mother and Dad loosened up quite a bit as they and we got older, and if Tim had ever felt any resentment toward them for their initial rejection of him, he only told his wife. His behavior toward his parents-in-law was gracious and warm, and they became very close.